The docking bay's thin atmosphere shimmered faintly, refracting the golden light from Maren's sun. Soraya Verne wiped sweat from her brow as she clamped a stabilizer on the aging shuttle's landing gear. The alloy hissed and sparked, but held firm. Her hands were steady, her movements methodical. She'd done this 100 times before, though not always for herself. Her children, Immerse, Kale, and Tyler, waited just beyond the airlock, watching her through the thick, scratched glass of the observation deck. She could feel their eyes on her, the weight of their silent questions. Are we safe here? Will this be enough? She lowered the torch and exhaled. The work was done. Another patch, another day. Soraya felt like a scavenger pulling together scraps to keep their fragile world intact. She wasn't proud of it, but pride had no place here. Maren's haven was less of a settlement and more of an afterthought, a rocky outpost where alien traders met to barter and resupply before disappearing back into the stars. For human colonists like Soraya and her children, it was a dead end. The station's infrastructure was old, its air filters a patchwork of foreign tech. The local economy ran on exchanges of scavenged parts and favors, not credits or stability. The few human settlers who passed through never stayed long, but Soraya couldn't leave, not without a destination. And so she lived on the fringes, her family overlooked, her presence tolerated but never welcomed. When she returned to the observation deck, her children greeted her with practiced cheer. Immerse, her eldest at 11, was already tugging at her sleeve. "Mom, I think I fixed the comm array," he announced, his blue-gray eyes lighting up. "The range is better now, but we still need a proper converter. Do you think we can—" "Later," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Dinner first." Immerse nodded, though she saw the disappointment flicker across his face. It pained her. He had his father's tenacity, a hunger to create and fix, but Soraya didn't have the resources to let him fully explore it. She didn't even have the time. Kale, 9, was already setting the table, a folding slab of metal and 2 mismatched crates serving as chairs. He looked up from arranging their simple meal and offered her a quiet smile. Soraya ruffled his dark hair as she passed, grateful for his steady presence. Kyle had a way of observing the world in stillness, as if searching for patterns in the chaos. It gave her comfort, even if she didn't always know how to reach him. Tyler, the youngest, darted in from the corner, her 7-year-old energy undimmed by the station's dull corridors. "I found another shiny thing," she declared, holding up a piece of polished scrap she'd fished out from under a bulkhead. Her grin was infectious. Soraya chuckled, shaking her head. "That's not for eating, Tyler. Put it with your collection." The meal was sparse. Hydrated protein packs and nutrient cubes warmed over a portable heat coil, but it filled their stomachs. The children chattered about their day, the fragments of adventure they managed to carve out in the station's shadowed corners. Soraya listened, nodding, smiling, hiding her worries behind a mask of calm. After dinner, when the children were settled into their shared sleeping quarters, Soraya stepped into the small maintenance bay she rented. Her hands found the familiar grooves of her tools, her mind turning over the day's repairs, the next job, the next scavenge. But her thoughts drifted, unbidden, to their future. She had applied for a transfer to New Talos months ago, hoping for a chance at a real colony with schools, stable work, and a place where her children could belong. So far, no response. The aliens on Maren's Haven never gave her trouble, but they never gave her friendship either. Most found humans curious at best, nuisances at worst. She saw the way they skirted around her in the market stalls, how they avoided her children's laughter echoing through the halls. They weren't cruel, they simply didn't care. Soraya's little family was a ghost to them, a fleeting presence. That didn't matter in the grand calculus of the galaxy. She sighed, rubbing her hands over her face. No one would hand them a chance. She had to earn it, as she always had. Her children deserved better, And if the universe wasn't going to offer it, she would find a way to carve it out herself. For now, though, she had work to do. Another patch, another day. The station's lighting flickered faintly as Soraya adjusted the servo arm on her workbench. The device's fine mechanics were delicate and foreign, a blend of Arcturian alloy and human polymer that required a steady hand and a sharp eye. She was halfway through reassembling the internal circuits when a shadow crossed the doorway. Need a hand. The voice was deep, warm, and distinctly human. She looked up to see Caleb Thorne leaning against the entrance, his uniform's cuffs slightly unfastened, giving him a relaxed, approachable air. He had the look of someone who carried his weariness lightly, as if used to shouldering other people's burdens without complaint. Soraya straightened up, feeling the instinctive wariness that came with a decade of being dismissed or ignored by her neighbors. She wasn't used to offers of help, especially not from strangers. "I'm fine, thanks," she said, her tone neutral. Her gaze flicked back to the servo arm. "Just a little maintenance work." Caleb stepped closer, keeping his movements slow, unthreatening. "Looks like more than just maintenance. That's a delicate piece of equipment." He tilted his head toward the bench. "Mind if I watch?" Soraya hesitated. "Suit yourself," she said after a moment, and returned her focus to the intricate wiring. Caleb didn't say anything at first, just observed as she worked. After a few minutes, she noticed him watching her hands, his brow furrowed in thought. "You've got a good touch," he said. "Most mechanics I've met would have fumbled that interface and melted the whole thing down." Soraya glanced at him, surprised by the genuine note of respect in his voice. "Comes with practice," she replied simply. "Not a lot of human tech out here, so I've had to learn on the fly." Caleb nodded. "I've been stationed in places like that. When I served on a humanitarian freighter, we often had to make do with whatever we could find. Sometimes it felt like patching holes in a sieve, but it kept us moving." His words piqued Soraya's curiosity despite herself. "A freighter? That doesn't sound like standard military deployment." "It wasn't," Caleb said. "I started out as a shipboard medic on a reconnaissance cruiser, but over time I ended up working on relief efforts. We'd show up in war-torn systems, treat the wounded, patch up ships, and help refugees get to safety. I learned to fix things because I had to. Medicine only goes so far when you're surrounded by broken equipment and desperate people." Soraya set down the servo arm and looked at him. His face was calm, but there was a weight behind his words, a history he wasn't fully sharing. She knew better than to pry. Everyone in the drift carried some kind of burden. Instead, she shifted the conversation to something safer. "You're far from home," she said. "What brings you to Marin's Haven?" Caleb hesitated, just a fraction of a second. "I'm on a resupply run," he said casually. "Needed a break from deep space. This outpost isn't much, but it's peaceful." His eyes flicked toward the open doorway, where faint sounds of her children's laughter carried from the living quarters. "And the company's more interesting than I expected." Soraya wasn't sure how to respond to that. She studied him, looking for signs of pity or condescension. She saw none. Instead, Caleb's gaze was thoughtful, his expression open. He wasn't offering charity. He was simply paying attention, something she hadn't experienced in a long time. "So what about you?" Caleb asked. "How does someone like you end up in a place like this?" Her hands tightened on the edge of the workbench. "I didn't end up here," she said quietly. "I chose it. After my husband. After I realized I couldn't raise my kids on Earth. I came here because it was somewhere I could keep them safe. Somewhere I could survive." "Safe?" Caleb repeated the word as if testing its weight. "I can see why you'd think that. This place may be isolated, but it's stable enough." "For now," Soraya said. "But it's not enough. I applied for a transfer to New Talos, a proper colony, better schools, real housing, a chance for my kids to grow up somewhere they can belong." "That's a good plan," Caleb said, his tone even. "New Talos has a lot of promise." "If I can get the transfer," she admitted. "The waiting list is years long, no guarantees." Caleb nodded slowly, then changed the subject. "Your kids seem sharp." The older one, Immerse, was telling me about the comm relay he rigged up. Pretty impressive for his age. "He's resourceful," Soraya said. She allowed herself a small smile. "Always trying to fix things. I just wish I could give him more to work with." "You've done a lot for them already," Caleb said. "More than most would in your situation." The words caught her off guard. She didn't know what to say, so she turned back to the servo arm and finished tightening the final coupling. When she looked up again, Caleb was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read, something between admiration and understanding. "Thanks for letting me hang around," he said. "I'll get out of your way." He left as quietly as he'd come, and Soraya found herself thinking about him long after he was gone. It wasn't just his offer to help or his easy conversation. It was the sense that, for once, someone had really seen her, not just a struggling single mother on a distant outpost, but a person worth noticing. And as much as she hated to admit it, that was something she hadn't felt in a very long time. The days stretched into weeks, and Caleb's presence on Marin's Haven began to feel less like a fleeting curiosity and more like a subtle shift in the orbit of Soraya's life. He found ways to linger, an offer to help reinforce an old water reclamation unit, advice on adjusting her ancient atmospheric filters, a quiet comment on Kale's latest drawing. Though he was still officially on leave, he seemed to have a knack for being useful without overstepping, and Soraya found herself tolerating, even welcoming, his presence. It was late one evening, long after the children had gone to sleep. When Caleb finally let his guard down, Soraya had invited him into the small kitchen nook she'd carved out of their cramped quarters. The space was little more than a counter, a hot plate, and a table built from salvaged bulkhead panels. But she'd made it her own, with small touches. Faded postcards from Earth tacked to the wall, a fraying tablecloth she'd brought with her from her old life. Caleb leaned back in one of the mismatched chairs, cradling a cup of lukewarm synth tea. As Soraya finished her own drink, "Why are you really here?" Soraya asked, her voice quiet but direct. Caleb looked up from his cup, and for a moment he didn't answer. The lines at the corners of his eyes seemed deeper than usual. The light in the kitchen casting shadows that made him appear older. Finally, he set the cup down and met her gaze. "I heard about you," he said simply. Soraya's eyebrows knitted together. "What do you mean?" Caleb sighed. "It's not just a coincidence that I showed up at Marin's Haven. I was on leave, yes, but I'd also been working near the Delta Aquilae system. I treated a lot of displaced families there, human and alien alike. During that time, I came across a few reports about this place, about a human single mother trying to make a life for herself and her kids on a station where humans are a minority, with no real support network. Your name came up. Reports." Soraya leaned back in her chair, her fingers tightening around the rim of her cup. "From who? Why would anyone bother writing about us?" "Not official reports," Caleb clarified. "More like accounts from travelers. A freighter captain mentioned you to one of my ship's crew, said you were holding things together out here, even though you had no business succeeding. The story stuck with me. When I had some downtime, I decided to see for myself." Soraya was silent for a long moment. "So you came here out of, what, curiosity?" "Partly," Caleb admitted, "but mostly because I wanted to understand why. Why someone would stay in a place like this when there are better options out there. I guess I wanted to see if there was anything I could do to help." "I see." Soraya's voice was cautious. She studied him, searching for any hint of condescension or pity, but all she saw in Caleb's expression was a kind of quiet determination. "You could have just sent a message," she said finally. You didn't have to come all the way out. Here. I don't think I would have understood just how much you've accomplished if I hadn't seen it in person, Caleb replied. You've kept your family together in conditions most people wouldn't last a month in. That's no small thing. Soraya looked away, her throat tightening. She didn't want gratitude. She wanted answers, solutions. So what now? She asked, her voice tinged with a defensive edge. What's your plan? Offer me a pat on the back and move on? No, Caleb said, leaning forward. His voice was steady, but there was a note of urgency in it now. I came here because I think I can help. I still have contacts within the colonial administration, people who can push through settlement requests, especially for families like yours. I can't promise anything, but I know who to talk to. Why would you do that? Soraya asked, suspicion creeping into her tone. You don't know me. Why would you put yourself out there for a stranger? Because I've spent too much of my life patching people up, only to send them back into impossible situations, Caleb said. You're trying to give your kids a better life. That's not something I see every day, not out here. If I can help you get a real chance at that, I'm going to try. Soraya's hands tightened around her cup, her knuckles white. She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that this stranger had no ulterior motives. But years of struggling alone had taught her to be cautious. And if it doesn't work, she asked, if you make these calls and nothing changes, what happens then? Then you'll still have done what you've always done. Find a way to keep going, Caleb said simply. But at least you'll know someone tried. The room was quiet, except for the faint hum of the air filtration unit. Soraya studied Caleb's face, looking for cracks in his sincerity. When she found none, she let out a slow breath and nodded. Okay, she said. If you think you can help, then I'll take the chance. Caleb nodded in return, a small, relieved smile crossing his face. I'll start reaching out in the morning. Soraya finished her tea and stood, clearing the east cups from the table. Caleb stayed seated for a moment, his gaze steady but unobtrusive. Finally, he rose as well, and as he stepped toward the door, he turned back. Soraya, he said, his voice quiet, no one should have to do this alone. You've done more than enough. I'll do what I can to make sure you don't have to. Keep fighting uphill forever. She nodded, unsure of how to respond. As the door slid shut behind him, she stood in the middle of the room, the emptiness of the space pressing in around her. But for the first time in a long time, that emptiness felt a little less overwhelming. The day they left Marin's Haven, Soraya felt as though she'd been holding her breath for years. The docking bay, normally echoing with the gruff chatter of alien traders, was eerily silent. A few of the locals had gathered at a distance, curious but nonchalant. She doubted they even realized she and the kids were leaving for good. Her small family stood near the boarding ramp of the transport Caleb had arranged. It was larger and cleaner than anything Soraya had ever flown on, an official colonial vessel with real seats, safety harnesses, and an air of legitimacy she hadn't felt in over a decade. The kids were wide-eyed, clutching the few belongings they'd managed to pack. A bundle of Immerse's hand-built gadgets, Kyle's sketchbook and stylus, Tyler's collection of polished bits of scrap that glittered like gems. I don't know what to say, Soraya admitted to Caleb as he stood off to the side, watching quietly. Thank you seems not enough. You don't have to say anything, Caleb replied, his voice as steady as always. This is your moment. Your kids. A moment. Immerse looked up from his pile of gadgets and grinned. Is it true there's a whole school for engineering on New Talos, with real labs and tools? That's right, Caleb said, ruffling the boy's hair. You'll have everything you need to build bigger, better machines. Tyler bounced on her toes. What about the forests? Mum said there are forests. Are they huge? Can we climb the trees? Big as you can imagine, Caleb said with a smile. Just don't try climbing the carnivorous ones. They tend to fight back. Tyler's eyes grew even wider. No way! Really? Caleb winked. You'll have to see for yourself. As the kids buzzed with excitement, Soraya allowed herself to step back and take it all in. For years, she'd carried every burden alone, every scraped knee, every broken part, every sleepless night wondering if she'd made the right choice leaving Earth. But here, now, on the cusp of a new world, she realized she wasn't alone anymore. Caleb hadn't just pulled some strings or made a few calls. He'd believed in them, in her. That belief had opened a door she thought would stay closed forever. When the time came to board, Caleb helped them carry their belongings up the ramp. Inside, the transport's interior was bright and orderly, a far cry from the cobbled-together chaos of Marin's Haven. The crew welcomed them politely, guiding the children to their seats. Soraya followed, pausing only once to glance back at Caleb. "I don't know what we'll find on New Talos," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You'll find a place to belong," he said, his tone filled with quiet certainty. "And if you need anything, you know how to reach me." She nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. For the first time in years, her smile wasn't forced. It was real. The engines hummed to life. Soraya settled into her seat, Tyler beside her, Immerse and Kale across the aisle. The kids chatted about what they'd do first on New Talos, their excitement infectious. Soraya let herself lean back, her hand resting on Tyler's tiny shoulder. The view through the porthole shifted, Marin's Haven growing smaller as the transport ascended into the stars. For so long, that outpost had been her whole world, a place of struggle, survival, and isolation. Now, it was behind them. Ahead lay a world full of possibilities. The stars stretched out in every direction, vast and endless, but Soraya didn't feel lost. For the first time, she knew exactly where they were going.